Welcome to part 2 of this Football Manager 2020 experiment where we're trying to find out if Africa can dominate world football. So in this part 2 we're going to start at the 2034 World Cup and work our way through a few more World Cups. Now I've hidden where it says holders at the top here, so you can't see the winners until the final, which makes it a little bit more interesting, I think. Anyway, as you can see, Group B, Rwanda managed to qualify for the World Cup but unfortunately finished bottom. Sierra Leone also qualified for their first World Cup but finished bottom as well. However, in Group D, Tunisia did qualify, and in Group I, Ivory Coast went through in second place as well. Group J, Cameroon went through. Nigeria crashed out in Group K, and any more African teams? South Africa topped their group with 6 points. Ghana also qualified through from their group, and so did Mali, finishing top. So lots of African teams qualifying. Of course, it's a new format now. There's a more opportunity for African teams to qualify, which is great. Then in the second round, we saw Tunisia defeat reigning champions Turkey. So, of course, they surprisingly won the World Cup last time, but Tunisia managed to beat them this time round, which is great. Cameroon lost on penalties against Russia, a bit unlucky. That Ivory Coast lost against Belgium. South Africa defeated Laos 2-0. And Mali lost against Ghana. An all-African second round. Ghana beat them on penalties. So into the third round we go, where Tunisia unfortunately lost on penalties against Chile. Ghana lost against France, but South Africa, once again, doing very well. They defeated England 3-1 thanks to goals from Peter Jali, Thabiso Baloyi and Sanel Zulu. He's got 44 goals in 126 games for his country. He's a star player for South Africa. They've produced some talented players, but a talented squad rather than talented individuals. They've got lots of good squad players. Quarter final then. They actually managed to beat Switzerland on penalties. Fantastic news. So they went through to their second semi-final in a row, but unfortunately lost against Spain 4-1. That's unfortunate. And then in the third place playoff, they defeated Holland on penalties. Excellent news. Zungu with a goal. But yeah, they won on penalties to finish third for the second time in a row. Spain ended up winning the final, beating France in the final, by the way. I'll just quickly show you that final. But yeah, 2-0 win. Brilliant stuff from South Africa. A bit unfortunate not to get through to a final. Just that last step was just eluded them. But they have done phenomenally well in the last 4 years in particular, since the last World Cup and up until this point. They're 13th in the world rankings, which is currently the highest ranked African team. Ivory Coast also doing well in 15th. Just scroll down so you can see all of them. Unfortunately, there's a few teams towards the bottom. Zanzibar, Mayotte, Reunion, all they're picking up points now. I think they're playing games, which is good. Of course, they're competing mainly against these overpowered African teams now, which is it will be detrimental to the smaller teams in some ways. But if they do miraculously beat one of the big teams, then of course they'll get more points and climb up the world rankings. But South Africa, let's have a look at their team 4 years on. So they've got a really good player here, Lucas Williams. 26 years old, he's an absolute star. I don't remember him from last time, to be honest. I don't remember them having someone this good, but there we go. They've produced someone who is really, really world class. This guy's the second best player, goalkeeper. Really good. We've seen some good goalkeepers, haven't we, in this experiment? But as I said, it's the squad. If you compare them with other teams, like some nations do have one outstanding player. For example, Swaziland have a player with 160 current ability, but everyone else is really quite poor. With South Africa, they've got lots of players in this bracket, which is why they are doing so well. Remember this chap? Mohamed Camara managed to win 3 Ballon d'Ors in part 1. Well, he's now 31 years old, 58 goals in 108 games for Guinea, still at Barcelona, still banging them in, and still winning Ballon d'Ors. So he managed to win 4 in a row before this Swiss chap beat him to it. Mohamed Camara finishing second. But have a look at this. Noor El Sayed, who I think featured in part 1 as well. An Egyptian legend. 132 goals in 148 games for Egypt. Been at Real Madrid for many years. He finished third. And then the following year, Camara managed to regain his Ballon d'Or. And he won it for a second time in a row quite recently. So there's been a couple African players featuring on this. But Mohamed Camara is the real star. He's won this 6 times now. Let's move on to the 2038 World Cup then. I will look at African Cup of Nations and all the other competitions every now and then as well, but the main focus really is on the world competitions, the World Cup. Other things I can look at, by the way, the Olympics, Under 20 World Cup of course, and the World Club Championships as well. That's something else we can look at. Anyway, 2038 World Cup, you can see Morocco qualified from their group. Namibia managed to reach the World Cup but crashed out. Gabon managed to qualify from their group as well. Ghana went through in second place. South Africa won their group again. They're doing really well, aren't they? Algeria finished bottom of their group. Ivory Coast qualified. Egypt finished bottom of their group. So loads of African teams have made it. I don't know if the number of qualification places has been increased. Mali also finished bottom of their group. And Senegal went through from Group P. So into the second round we go. Plenty of teams, plenty of nations getting through to this stage, where Morocco unfortunately lost against France. Gabon beat Argentina on penalties. South Africa thrashed Ghana, a fellow African team of course, 4-1. Ivory Coast lost against Chile. I didn't notice Tanzania went through as well. They lost against England 4-0. And Senegal beat Turkey to go through. So a few teams getting through to the third round this time as well. Gabon going into the quarter-final stage, beating Switzerland on penalties after a 1-1 draw. South Africa beat Chile 2-0, despite missing a penalty and an injury there as well. And Senegal defeated Italy 1-0. So this is the best World Cup we have seen yet. Africa are starting to, maybe not dominate, but they're starting to be noticed, aren't they? So into the quarter-final, where South Africa's thrashed Gabon 5-0, absolutely mutilating them. That's a really, really impressive win. And Senegal lost 2-0 against Portugal, unfortunately. So South Africa into their third semi-final in a row, the only African team in this experiment to get to that stage. Let's see what happened. They've done it. They beat Belgium 2-0, and they're going to be taking on Spain in the final. Tladla with 2 goals, a 22-year-old. Sending South Africa into the final. Third place playoff then. Portugal beat Belgium. But let's have a look at the final. Have a look at this. South Africa are champions of the world. The first ever African nation to win a World Cup. Oh, it looks good. Holders, South Africa. They won in extra time. 2-1. It actually was 0-0 at 90 minutes. Nigabis opened the scoring for South Africa in the 111th minute. Let's have a look at the goal. It's a finish from the angle past the keeper. What a famous goal for South Africa. Unfortunately, Spain did equalise in the 118th minute. It looked destined to go to penalties, but in the 120th minute, Tanker stood up and scored the winning goal in a World Cup final. Have a look at this. He headed it in. Great header from Tanker. That's an appropriate goal for someone called Tanker, I think. Joaquim Tanker, that was only his second goal for his country, and it was in a World Cup final. Playing for Zamalek, by the way. We'll have a look at it in a second, because they are dominating club football in Africa. But wow, South Africa, I'm so pleased. I'm so pleased this has happened. Of course, I've given all the African nations the tools to go on and produce really good players, but it still possibly may not have happened. So Lucas Williams is still the best player in South Africa. He's moved on a free to Man City after his contract ran out at Real Madrid. The next best player, Sal van Heerden. And then I'm murdering these pronunciations, sorry. Where is Tanker then? So Tanker's 152 current ability, decent player, but he's certainly not the best one in the South African team. But I'm so pleased. They're up to 9th in the world rankings as well. Let's just filter out the African nations. So 9th, they're a long way above Ivory Coast. They are struggling to get into the top 15, aren't they? We've seen South Africa and Ivory Coast make it, but it has been a bit of a struggle for some of these nations. Reunion have moved up a couple places since last time, which is good to see. Djibouti still down there. I wonder if they've still got Kenneth in their team. I don't think they do. I think he's probably retired now. There he is, Kenneth. He's still playing at the age of 34 for PSG. Still starting games as well. What a legend Kenneth is. 20 goals in 86 games for Djibouti. They don't play as many games as some of the bigger African nations, which is why perhaps they're going to struggle a bit more than the likes of South Africa, for example. Anyway, back to South Africa. Benny McCarthy is the manager, by the way. That's brilliant. Club football for South Africa isn't amazing. 2.5 stars. I think it's probably going to be below the Egyptian league, isn't it? Can we look at Africa? I don't think we can just look at Africa, can we? It's got all the nations here. Where's Egypt? Well, I thought the Egyptian Premier League would have more than 2.5 stars, but I suppose it's just Zamalek in there that's really impressive. We'll have a look at them for a second. So this is Egypt, 40th in the world, but they have Zamalek, who are a 5-star reputation team, by the way. That is very impressive. Financially, they're in an okay position. They're rich in terms of Africa anyway, and they've obviously still got the perfect facilities. But their team is special. For an African team, for a team from Egypt to have 2 players with 167 current ability, one of which has potential to go on and be even better, and also a player from Swaziland who has very good current ability as well. They've got some really good players. If we have a look at the African Champions League, then they have won the most recent one, but they haven't won it every single time, which is surprising considering how dominant they are. So we've seen, since the last part, we've seen Casablanca from Morocco win it, Zamalek, then we saw a team from Sudan win it, 3.5-star reputation team from Sudan, and then Zamalek again, then an Algerian team, and then the Cameroon team again who won it. Did they win it previously? Oh no, that was a different Cameroon team, the team from the 2nd division, which was a massive shock. And then Casablanca won it again before Zamalek again this time. So it's surprising South Africa aren't dominating, because they've got some decent teams, and also we've actually loaded the South African League, of course. These are the past winners of the South African League, for those of you interested. Moving on to the African nations then. So no surprise that South Africa have done rather well. Since the start of this experiment, we've seen Senegal win it twice, Tunisia win it twice, Algeria have won it once, Cameroon have won it once, Ivory Coast, and the two most recent ones, South Africa beating Gabon and Tunisia. So no massive shocks so far. There's not really been any surprising winners. We've not seen the likes of the Gambia win it. They obviously had a good start to the experiment, getting into the first 2 World Cups, didn't they? How are they doing now? Because they were doing really well at one point, but they have dropped back down. They got up to 56th in the world rankings, unfortunately. Oh wow, but they've produced an incredible player. Baboucar Silla, who is actually the best player we've seen so far in terms of current ability. 193 current ability for this guy. Started in the Gambia, moved to Zamalek on a free, then to Real Madrid, and now recently to Spurs. What a star this guy is. I'll add him to the spreadsheet because he's an absolute beast. Moving on to the African Championship of Nations, which, just to remind you, this competition is only for players based in Africa. So players that play for African club teams. So it's a bit of a different competition to the African Cup of Nations. For example, in real life, the African Cup of Nations, Sadio Mane, Salah can play in that, but they wouldn't be able to play in this one. So we've had some different winners. Ivory Coast have won it 3 times. We've seen Nigeria win it, Tunisia, Ghana, Senegal, Togo, which is the most surprising winner of all, beating Uganda in the finals. Let's have a look at Togo, 67th in the world rankings. They've produced a very good player as well. Komi Diallo plays for Barcelona. I mean, Europe is full of these world-class Africans now. We might not see many African teams win the World Cup, but they have produced some world-class talent, and that has really transformed the face of football. £113 million he moved to Barcelona for. Really, really good central midfielder. Look at that. There's 2 things below 10, jump and reach and long throws. Everything else is well above 10 really. So let's move on to the 2042 World Cup then. So let's have a look down. Nigeria qualified from Group B, Mali qualified from Group C, Madagascar qualified from Group E, really great achievement to qualify, Morocco from Group I, Cameroon from Group J, South Africa from Group K, absolute dominance from the African teams, Guinea from Group L, Equatorial Guinea did qualify but the first team to go out at the group stage, Ivory Coast from Group N, Liberia from Group O, and that's it. So only one African team failing to qualify for the second round, which is incredible. Nigeria then beat Uruguay 2-0 in the second round. We haven't seen Nigeria do much up to this point. It's been interesting to see how far they can go. Mali did lose against Italy, Madagascar lost against Chile, Cameroon lost against Turkey, Morocco lost against France, Guinea lost against Switzerland, and South Africa, the reigning champions, lost against Belgium. So they've all got to the second round but failing at this stage. Ivory Coast did beat Ukraine though after extra time, and Liberia lost against Sweden. So only 2 teams making it through to the third round, but it was a very successful group stage for the African teams. Nigeria defeated Italy 3-2 in the third round, with Ivory Coast winning on penalties against Sweden. In the quarterfinal, Nigeria thrashed Chile 3-0, great performance, but Ivory Coast lost on penalties against Switzerland. So the semi-final, this is such an unusual semi-final. Nigeria defeated Switzerland though, but that is fantastic. But Austria and Turkey, the other semi-finalists, of course Turkey won the World Cup 8 years, no, longer than that, 12 years ago. But seem to still be doing well. But what a brilliant performance from Nigeria to get through to the World Cup final. Mark Opera with both goals. But unfortunately, no other African teams were able to get this far in the competition, which is a shame. I mean, I suppose one getting to the semi-final is decent. So Austria won the other semi. In the third place playoff, what a game. Switzerland 5, Turkey 4. Let's just have a quick look at that. Crazy game. And then the final then. Let's have a look. It wasn't to be. Austria, a world champions, beating Nigeria 2-1 in the final. And it was a comeback as well. Prince Issa scored in the 62nd minute. Decent looking striker. But unfortunately, Christopher Busk scored 2 late goals, one of which in the 92nd minute to win the World Cup for Austria. So these are the winners then. We've had Spain, Brazil, Turkey, Spain, South Africa and Austria. But Nigeria have reached a final. So that is brilliant for them, considering they were really quite poor up to this point. But they're up to 21st in the world rankings. I'll filter out Africa once again. South Africa still highest. Then it's Ivory Coast and then Nigeria. But yeah, they've done well recently. Let's have a look at their team. They don't actually have that great a team. Looking at that compared to the South Africa team, you can see why they didn't win the final, I suppose. But they've done remarkably well to get that far, considering their squad isn't the best. They've got lots of players, sort of 130s, and I guess they just had a good campaign. They lost the 2 friendlies building up. They were thrashed by Croatia in the group stage, but a 3-1 win against China was enough. And then really, I suppose there was a couple surprising wins, beating Italy and Uruguay and Chile. They're tough teams. It was just Austria in the end that they fell to, which is a bit of a shame. But like I said, they've done really well. This is their manager, who is actually awful, and he got to a World Cup final. That is pretty incredible considering. I know a lot of you really enjoyed the detail level in part 1, and do not fear, I will be showing lots of detail once I've shown this World Cup. So we've skipped through 4 World Cups in this part 2. It's now July 2046. So I'll have a look at this World Cup, and then I'll have a look at all the other competitions. We'll try and find some outstanding wonder kids and world-class players. Look at Ballon d'Or, look at the Olympics, all the other competitions. But my main focus really is the World Cups. That's why I wanted to get through 4 World Cups and then concentrate on a bit more detail. So what's happened at the 2046 World Cup then? So Ivory Coast qualified from Group C, Morocco qualified from Group D, Mali qualified from Group E, Senegal went out in Group G. In Group H, there's no one. All the way down to Group J, where South Africa managed to win. Congo also won Group K. Uganda went out in Group L. And Algeria went out in Group N. And Burundi, they managed to get through to the second round as well. And Kenya as well. That is fantastic. So many African teams. I love this. Now, we'll be filling in the spreadsheet as well. So I'll show you that at the end. To see who's doing the best. I mean, obviously South Africa have won the World Cup, so unless an African team has won this World Cup, I imagine they'll probably be the most successful. So in the second round then, Morocco crashed out against Germany, Belgium beat Ivory Coast, Mali beat Switzerland 2-1 after extra time, South Africa beat Colombia, which is great to see, so they're through to another third round. Congo lost against Russia after extra time, and Burundi lost against Paraguay on penalties. But Kenya did beat Laos. I must say, they've done pretty well, Laos. They're 32nd in the world. What's going on there? They've done really well. Not entirely sure how they've done so well. I mean, they've got some decent players, but they don't have a particularly good squad. People have been asking me to do other parts of the world. I will eventually. But let's focus on Africa to start with. Maybe we'll do Southeast Asia, Oceania, North America. There's different things we can do with this, of course. Anyway, the third round, Mali lost against Brazil, South Africa beat Russia on penalties, and Kenya lost against Spain. Is that everyone? I think so. So we've only got South Africa left in the quarterfinal stage, where unfortunately they lost against Spain 4-2. So it's a more traditional looking World Cup, I must say, with the semi-finals between Brazil and Spain and Argentina and England, and Brazil and Argentina were triumphant. Spain beat England in the third place playoff. And then Argentina beat Brazil in the 2046 World Cup final. So nothing particularly amazing, I suppose, this time around. South Africa were the most successful team. They're still pretty high in the world rankings. In fact, they've been as high as 8th, but they're now 13th. So let's have a look at the world rankings. They are the highest ranked African team, which is no surprise. And then we've got a couple of teams in the 20s. But yeah, nothing major has happened. But we could certainly say South Africa haven't dominated world football. But they're maybe the nations haven't. But I think their players are starting to, because we've started to see them dominating the likes of PSG, Real Madrid and Barcelona and some of the big English teams as well. If we look at South Africa at the moment, their best players has now retired, I imagine, Lucas Williams, but they've got a decent player in Melin Lekua. He's not bad. Let's go through all of the nations then and have a look at some of the key players. We'll start with Algeria, alphabetical order, currently 53rd in the world rankings. They have a really good player playing for Bayern Munich, Nabil Amri. That's his history so far. So he's one to watch out for in part 3. Well, we'll go through a few more World Cups because he's playing very well. So he might help Algeria out a bit. I don't think they've done particularly well, have they, at the World Cup? If we have a look. Yeah, they've finished bottom of their group at the 3 World Cups that they've qualified for. So not particularly successful for Algeria, which is a little bit surprising. I thought they might do quite well. Angola, they've produced a few good players, haven't they? And they've got 3 players of over 150 current ability, and they've managed to get to the World Cup twice. Lost in the second round against England and finished bottom in 2030. So they've done okay. Benin, don't think they've really done anything, have they? But they've produced an alright player there. This chap's the best one. Doesn't currently have a club. Available on a free. Botswana, 185 current ability goalkeeper. That reminds me, actually, thinking about players without clubs. Few people are interested in this database and actually playing this and signing all these amazing African wonder kids. I've uploaded the database, so there's a link in the description below for you to download the database for those of you that are interested. Yeah, this goalkeeper is special, isn't he? Plays for PSG. I think we've seen him before, haven't we? What a brilliant team, by the way. Green lovers in Botswana. I love that. That is lovely. Obviously a fan of Greta Thunberg. Maybe she's the chairman. Burkina Faso, no one really there. Burundi, they've done really well to qualify for the recent World Cup, of course. Lost to Paraguay in the second round on penalties. But they don't have the best team. They've got one decent player who's 28, 106 caps, plays for Zamalek. But the rest of the team, you wouldn't have thought it'd be good enough to get through to the second round of the World Cup. But then again, the World Cup's been diluted a bit with all those extra teams going into the competition. Cameroon have a star. Cedric Nzana, who's only 21, left Eddingsport for Cotton Sport in Cameroon. The problem with this is you see this player and think, he's like a £90 million player or more. But the African teams just get no money. They're absolutely rinsed, which is a real shame. £1.9 million. They've had their hands ripped off, everything ripped off for this player. Because he is exceptional. He's one of the best players we've seen so far and could go on to be the best player of the whole experiment so far. So keep an eye out for him. Keep saying that, don't I? Keep an eye out. Keep an eye out for everyone. Cape Verde Islands, I've not seen them do anything, but Carvin Lopez is a very good player playing for Juventus. Moved for £60 million from Benfica where he started. I suppose they have that connection, don't they, to Portugal? Do they, Cape Verde? Yes, they actually gained independence from Portugal in 1975, I think. Someone, Glenn, who's a regular viewer of my channel, did comment saying the colonialism is still prevalent in this universe, basically, because in the past, of course, they would steal the resources of a country or even the people for slaves, of course. And now they're stealing people again, but they're stealing these footballers, they're stealing fullbacks and world-class players instead. All these European nations with connections to these African countries, which is a bit of a shame. Because I don't know, and there might be some players that have actually gone on to play for European nations that were born here. But it works both ways, of course. There will be players perhaps born in France or any European nation with second nationality of maybe Central African Republic that end up playing for these nations because they're not quite good enough for the country where they were born in Europe, for example. So that is possible. There's a good player here with potential. Chad had a really good player at one point, Fabrice Jingabe, who ended up with 112 caps for Chad. He did reach his potential of 189, ended up playing for PSG and Barcelona. So he had a good career, and they seem to have replaced him with this chap who could go on to big things. We'll see. Comoros, who don't really have anyone. Congo, oh, they've got a good player. Alain Ndinga, plays for Real Madrid, moved for £80 million from Dortmund. Started in Congo, though, as you can see there, before moving to Zamalek. I said Zamalek would trawl Africa and get all of the talent. They're not selling them on for a particularly high fee, though, are they? Despite having ridiculous reputation. You'd have thought they'd be able to sell their players for a lot more money. This is currently the best player, by the way, playing for something. He's really good, isn't he? 184 current ability, 194 potential. Wow, what a player! An Egyptian wonder kid, explosive striker, and they've actually managed to keep him. Surely he'll move to Europe at some point, but I suppose with the reputation of Zamalek, it might not happen. You know, he might stay around. Oh, there's so many good players here. Abdallah Hamdan, 23 years old, playing for Atletico Madrid, moved on a free from New Soga. What a player. We've produced some stars. I suppose if Africa were able to compete as a continent, they would win everything because of all the players they're producing here. Djibouti have produced another really good player, Ali Deha. Of course, they had Kenneth, who we looked at earlier. £103 million this player is. What a star. So Djibouti produced a couple good players, but they're really far down the world rankings. Probably because they don't play that many games. And when they do play them, they're losing against their African friends, their African neighbours. They're not playing friendlies against non-African teams either. So, I mean, they need to beat someone like Reunion, don't they, to help boost their races. They lost against Bayot, so that's a bit of a surprise considering the quality that Djibouti have actually produced. They're just not doing it on match days, I suppose. Democratic Republic of Congo, 77th in the world rankings. Let's have a look at their team. Oh, they've produced. Oh, I already looked at him. I've gone backwards. Sorry. Egypt are next. This is the really good guy. He is so good. What a player. 184 current ability. He could reach that 194. He's only 22, remember. The thing is, most teams only seem to have one star, don't they? It's rare to find a team, a nation that has two real world-class players. As we skip through here, there's not really any. I mean, this chap's got quite a bit of potential, to be fair, for Gabon. 143 current ability, 186 potential. Ghana have a player called Eric with very good potential, playing for Zamalek, of course. Guinea have a good player, playing for Zamalek as well. Another striker. Guinea-Bissau, no one really there. Ivory Coast have a really good player, Kone, centre-back, 180 current ability, plays with Bayern Munich. Kenya don't really have anyone, but didn't they get to the most recent World Cup? I think they may have done. Yeah, they did. They did really well. They got to the third round, and considering the team is fairly weak, that is really quite impressive what they've managed to achieve there. I suppose they beat Turkey, who've won a World Cup recently, of course. Let's keep going. Lesotho, not really anything there. Liberia, no one really there. I mean, these are actually decent players. Beforehand, they were producing players with like 90 current ability, and now they're producing players that potentially could get to 160. So, but I'm just brushing over them because it's not 180. We're so used to seeing these players with 180 potential now that I'm actually ignoring some of these fairly decent players. Madagascar, of course, got through to the second round of the World Cup recently. That is really impressive. This is the best player, 34 years old, 158 caps. He might have been better at once upon a time. He's 34, so he might have reached that potential, then dropped off a bit. He did go to Europe for a short time, played for Leipzig and Hoffenheim, and played in China for many, many years. I love the names from Madagascar, by the way. Wonderful. Malawi. Oh, good player playing for Manchester United, moved for £88 million. Kawalu, a left winger. Look at some of these attributes. 19 on crossing. Mali have done fairly well, haven't they? They've actually reached quite a few World Cups. 26, 34, 38, 42. They've reached the last 4 World Cups. Got through to the third round most recently. Interesting that we're seeing quite similar teams with, decent players, but not amazing. But they're actually doing really well. This guy plays for PSG, so he's actually a good player with 154 current ability. That's not bad at all. Good enough to play for PSG. Mauritania, nothing, no one of note there really. They're currently 152nd in the world rankings. Mauritius, no one there. Mayotte, who really are up against it. They're a French island, aren't they? So a lot of their talent will, if they do produce talent, it'll probably be nicked. And they have such a small population, that's another thing to consider. Some of these nations have huge populations, they're more likely to produce much better players. But these little islands, they don't have the pool to select from, so they're less likely to produce really good players. Morocco, decent player with potential here, currently playing for Porto. Mozambique, likewise, decent player here, good current ability, decent potential, although he's 23 already. Namibia, no one there really. Niger, they're always going to be up against it as well. Nigeria, you'd expect them to do well, and they did. They got to the World Cup final, but I'm still surprised that the team that they have, they're not. It's not the best team. They've got players that have decent potential, but most of them aren't going to reach that potential. I wonder who they've got in the youth team. Anyone coming through of note? Not really. There's one player of 157 potential. Aloy Ali. Looks pretty decent, right winger. But yeah, it is surprising they got through to the final. Reunion, they've produced a player with 150 potential. He's not reached that though, he's 26. Rwanda, of course, managed to get through to the 2034 World Cup, which was pretty surprising, considering they're now 109th in the world rankings. Back then, when they actually qualified, they must have been pretty low down. They did remarkably well to get through. They've got one player with decent potential who I think we've already looked at because he's called Eric. Unless there was another Eric. I can't remember. No one there. Senegal, they've done okay, haven't they? They've won a few things and they've done well in the World Cup. 26, 30, 38 and 46. So they've not managed to get through to every World Cup, but they've reached a quarter-final. Seychelles, as I said before, I love the Seychelles flag. But they've produced a player that has very good potential, actually. 166 potential, but the problem is he needs to try and leave the Seychelles. He's not going to. I mean, of course, we did actually improve the facilities of all these African clubs, but have they managed to keep really good facilities? Oh, they have actually. That surprises me because they've kept their underwriter. I wonder if all the clubs have managed to keep their underwriter. Usually, they chairmans change, but for this club in particular, they've kept their underwriter, which has made them be able to improve their facilities and make sure they're still the best in the world. So that is probably why they're still able to produce these players. And if he does stay, he might reach the potential. It's unlikely though. Sierra Leone, they've got a couple decent players in there. Somalia, he's 25, not really got potential. And then we've got South Africa, of course, who have been the best team in this experiment so far. It'll be interesting if things change over the next couple decades. South Sudan, they've produced a couple really good players during this experiment. This one in particular looks good. He's playing in Saudi Arabia at the moment, but he's got 151 current ability, 182 potential, 21, could still reach it I suppose. Then we've got Sudan, who've done better than South Sudan, but don't actually have better players. If we look at South Sudan, there's 196 in the world rankings, but look at they've got three. I suppose the problem is here, they've got three decent players, one of which is very good, Premier League quality player. But then with Sudan, although there's no one really of note, pretty much all their squad has over 100 current ability, whereas with South Sudan, the majority of the squad has under 100 current ability. So the actual team performance is much lower. Swaziland, he's decent, but he's never going to reach his potential. Tanzania, they've done okay, haven't they? They've reached 2 World Cups, reached the second round in 2038, so they've not done too badly. The Gambia, obviously very good start to the experiment, but dropped off. But they've got some decent players. They're similar to Sudan, I suppose, with lots of players over 100 current ability. Togo, once again similar, I guess, to the previous nations mentioned. Tunisia, they've done quite well. They've produced some good players. They've reached a few World Cups, 26, 30 and 34, but haven't made it since then. And they have reached the quarter-final and the third round. Then we've got Uganda, someone with good potential, but he's 24 and without a club. Zambia, no one really there. Zanzibar, they did actually produce someone with really good potential. And he may have reached it because he is 36 now. Omar, he played for Monaco, so I imagine he was better than this at one point. Was better than that current ability. Zimbabwe, 156 current ability, 166 potential. Good central midfielder. currently playing for Sao Paulo. And then we're back to Algeria. Let's have a look at the World Golden Ball then. So we haven't seen this since back when Cameroon managed to win his 6th World Ballon d'Or, whatever you want to call it, World Golden Ball. So he actually won 3 more after that. He won his last one at the age of 33. And then after that point, let's go up. So, we had a player, Diallo, finished 2nd at the age of 26. He's now 34 years old, but in his prime for Barcelona, he was a star. He's still really good, to be fair, at the age of 34. But to finish 2nd, obviously a very impressive player. Great stuff for Togo, I suppose. And he finished 2nd the year after as well. And then after that point, he finished 3rd. And then we saw no Africans there. No Africans there. And I don't think we've seen anyone since that point. We've seen Slovenian and Mexicans done very well. But we've seen some exceptional African talent, haven't we? I'm sure it's similar for World Player of the Year. It's pretty much the same, I think. Footballer of the Year. Diallo did win this one at the age of 29. That's fantastic. I'm pleased he managed to win that award. That's good. Under 21 Footballer of the Year. Any Africans in here? Go all the way back to the start. I don't think there is. It's usually dominant. There's an Ivorian. Kamara. He's now 28 years old. What's his current status? 143 current ability. So it's not always the players with amazing potential that end up winning these awards. He obviously had a very good time at the age of 21, playing for Sevilla. 16 goals, decent average rating, and managed to pick up that award. So that's not bad going at all. And recently we've seen Malik Kane from Senegal manage to win it. But likewise, he's not a particularly special player. He's only 126 current ability, but he managed to win the World Player, under 21 Footballer of the Year award, which is really quite impressive. Just a shame he didn't go on to bigger and better things, but that's still an impressive award to win, isn't it? Goalkeeper of the Year? We've seen lots of good goalkeepers, so in theory we should have seen a few. Now this chap, remember, he had 199 potential, and he actually managed to win World Goalkeeper of the Year. He never reached 199 current ability, but he got fairly close, and he ended up being a legend for PSG, of course. He might even be a legend. Let's have a quick look. He's not. PSG seem to be a bit strict with who's added to this list. We can't see their best team either because we don't have the French League loaded. But that is impressive. He did really well, and I'm pleased that he managed to pick up this award. He finished 3rd the following 2 years. And then let's keep going up with... he finished 2nd again. That was at the age of 30. And 2nd... and 3rd, and this is when we saw, in fact, two in a row from Lassina Kalou, an Ivorian goalkeeper who's also retired now, ended up playing for Barcelona. 195 caps for Ivory Coast, fantastic goalkeeper. And then Pierre finished 2nd again at the age of 33. Kalou won it again for the 3rd time and finished 2nd, and we saw Pierre finish 3rd. Let's keep going up then. Botswanan goalkeeper finishing 3rd. So we really have seen some very good goalkeepers on this save. He actually won it most recently, so he's still playing at the age of 31. Why haven't we seen an award? I've not scrolled up enough. Yeah, he's still playing at the age of 31 for PSG, doing really well. I'm going all over the place here, sorry. And then since then, he's won it again, and we've seen him finish 3rd, and most recently, South African goalkeeper. And Kalou featured again at the age of 37, so he's only just retired. Managed to finish 3rd in the World Goalkeeper of the Year award. And the South African, who's got 182 caps for his country, playing for Chelsea, finished 2nd in the most recent award as well at the age of 36. Thought we'd have a quick look at the Olympic Games. Ivory Coast actually finished 2nd in 2024, with Cameroon finishing 3rd. Mali finished 3rd in 2028. Nigeria finished 2nd in 2036. And then Ivory Coast finished 3rd in 2040. So some impressive performances. It's mainly under 23 players at the Olympics, remember, with 3 over the age of 23, I think. And South Africa actually hosted the 2040 Olympics. Under 20 World Cup then. So this is a big one. This is one of the most important competitions because, of course, it's lots of young players playing at a World Cup. And it's the only other world competition, really, apart from the Olympics, on the games. So there's no Confederations Cup anymore, I don't think. So we have seen Cameroon win this, of course, at the end of part 1. And since then, we saw South Africa finish 3rd, Ghana beat South Africa in the 2035 finals. The two African teams against each other. South Africa then won it 2 years later in 2037, with Ivory Coast finishing third. Nigeria finished second, Tunisia third, South Africa third, Morocco third. So there's been lots of African teams featuring in finals and winning finals. If we just go back and have a look. Oh, they finished third, didn't they? There we go. So when was the recent final where we saw African teams? Nigeria lost in 2039. South Africa beat France. And yeah, this was an interesting one. Ghana under-20s beating South Africa under-20s. So at this stage, African nations seem to be quite dominant. It's just replicating that at a more senior level. When they're under-20, all these teams are doing really well. We've seen a few African nations win this competition, which is really quite impressive. It's just after this point that they're not doing badly, but they're struggling a bit more against European and South American teams. These are the recent winners of the African Cup of Nations then, so no surprises there. South Africa have won 4 in a row at one point. We've seen Burkina Faso reach a final and Gabon a couple finals. Togo have reached a final. But there's no massive shocks there, are there? Algeria did well to win it, considering they've not produced that many amazing players. So that's probably the most interesting win. I like the fact Morocco have done quite well as well. Then we've got the African Championship of Nations, where we've had a few more interesting winners. Of course, Togo won it, Mali, Ethiopia finished second. African Under-20 Cup of Nations, these are the winners. Zimbabwe won it in 2043, so only 3 years ago. They must have some decent players in there. Yeah, well, one decent. They've got a few, I suppose. Well, they've done well to win that competition anyway. Then the under-23s. This is only every 4 years, so there's no shocks there really. Apart from really Zambia winning the first one, I suppose, is the biggest shock. African Champions League then. So Zamalek have continued to dominate, as you can see. They've won quite a few now. They've won 3 in a row recently. Ajax Cape Town from South Africa have also managed to win it. And ASEC, they're quite a famous team from Ivory Coast. They produce quite a lot of talent. They managed to win it as well. We've also got these other things. African Confederation Cup, which is mainly... is this like the Europa League of Africa? Possibly, I don't know. There's a few different winners in here. Democratic Republic of Congo Club have managed to win it. Sunshine Stars from Nigeria, lovely name. So yeah, there's a few different winners there. And then the African Super Cup, which I presume is the winner of those two competitions taking on each other. So this must be like the Europa League for Africa. So let's end this part 2 by taking a look at this spreadsheet that I've put together. Hopefully I've filled this in correctly. So despite South Africa reaching a World Cup final and winning it, they never got higher than 8th in the world rankings. It might be because they're not taking on South American and European teams quite as often as those nations. They're mainly playing African nations, some of which are very low down, so that doesn't give them many points for the world rankings, I guess. If we just scroll down, you can see the highest ranking for each of the nations, and then the ranking difference from the largest to the smallest. So the Gambia is still the most successful in terms of increasing their world ranking by 116 places. Liberia have also done pretty well. Burundi, there's a few teams that have done very well, but in terms of increasing their ranking, but haven't necessarily won very much. Of course, the only team to win the World Cup is South Africa, and they've also won the most Africa Cup of Nations, winning 4. When it comes to the other Chan, whatever it's called, the other African competition, Ivory Coast have managed to win the most with 3. And then Under-20 World Cup, we've seen 3 different nations win the Under-20 World Cup: Cameroon, Ghana and South Africa, which is pretty impressive. And then the Champions League, so club football. Egypt are dominating club football, but they are definitely underachieving when it comes to national football. Their highest ranking has been number 24, but considering they've produced some very good players, they're also attracting lots of good players to Egypt. They don't necessarily play for Egypt, but you'd have thought with Zamalek being so dominant, they'd be able to produce some better players or more players that would enable Egypt to do better on the world scene, but that just hasn't happened for them. And then when it comes to Ballon d'Or, we've only seen one player win it so far, and he won it 9 times, of course. Camara from Guinea. Let's have a look at the World Cup in a bit more detail then. So South Africa have done very well. They obviously won it, but they've also finished 3rd twice and reached the 2nd round twice. Nigeria, the only nation to finish runners-up. So there's only been 2 countries that have reached the final so far. In their previous World Cups, or the other World Cups, they haven't done particularly well. One group stage, one second round, and one runners-up. So they haven't actually qualified for that many. Quarter-final stages, we've seen Gabon reach a quarter-final and a second round. Ivory Coast, Senegal and Tunisia, the other nations to reach quarterfinals. They've done all right. It's just trying to get past that quarterfinal stage. Loads of teams are getting through to the third round, as you can see here, and the second round in particular. Lots of nations have reached the second round, including Madagascar and Tanzania, Liberia, Gabon. I mean, there's been some surprises in there, and some surprises in actually getting through to the group stage as well. So qualifying for the World Cup. Sierra Leone have done really well. Namibia, Rwanda, Equatorial Guinea. So we're definitely starting to see African teams have some success and qualify for the World Cup. Of course, with a bigger World Cup, they're more likely to qualify. They're not dominating the world yet, that's for sure. But maybe in part 3, we'll start to see some other African nations have some success. Maybe we'll see another African nation win the World Cup, hopefully. Hopefully South Africa won't be the last. Just to remind you, I have put the database in the description below. You can click on that and download the database and play on this database if you so wish. You can probably download other African leagues that people have unlocked and connect it to this database and then maybe play in the Egyptian League, for example. That's completely up to you. But until next time, enjoy FM20, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for watching. I'll see you very soon.